Good evening. Welcome to Garden Hour, brought to you each week, this time by SDSU Extension. I'm Rhoda Burrows, and I will be your host and the entire panel tonight. It will just be you and I and our faithful technician, Evan. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Remember that you can put your name, put your questions in either the chat box or the Q&A. And I think Evan's going to help me out with this a bit tonight. So we'll go ahead and get started here. All right. So this is the time of season when people are asking, can I still plant X, Y, or Z? And so you saw this graphic a few weeks ago, and I brought it back, but I changed the number of days to frost. We're counting down now. In the coldest areas of the state, you have a little over 2 months before average first frost of the fall, and that's 32 degrees. We could change this to 28 because a lot of plants can take it down to 28 rather than 32, but since we're just going to go with this. So what can I plant at those temperatures? And you can look and see we've got a little warm spot down by Lake Andes area, and the rest of us are sort of over the board. Now, this is a 20-year average, and stopping in 2020, one thing we know about global warming is, although we're on average getting warmer, it becomes more erratic. So we don't know if we'll have frost in August or not until November. It's always the luck of the draw. But this is an average that you can take a look at and see if you're a betting person, you want to try something and see if it'll work, or you want to keep things safe, put them in a container so that you can take them in if it gets too cold. So given that, what are things that we can plant pretty reliably now? Salad greens ripen or get ready in 40 to 50 days. And you can plant these up at least through the end of the month. Some of the salad greens do not like to germinate at hotter temperatures. So you might either want to cover them or start them in a shady area, or even indoors, and then move them out. So they will not like the heat. So put them in a cooler area in your yard if you can. Kohlrabi, another cool season crop. This one we could probably plant to the end of the month easily because it's heat or cold tolerant, frost tolerant. So you've got some time with that. Green beans, on the other hand, they're a warm season crop. They like those temperatures that we're having now. They will slow up considerably in their growth as it starts to get cooler at night. So you want to get those in as soon as you can, and maybe look for the shorter season varieties. Our days will also be getting shorter, so we'll have less plant growth as the fall proceeds. Beets are another one that are fairly cold tolerant. So anytime now. Carrots, the same thing. Cucumbers are warm season crops, so get those in right away, and probably in the next week or so. And after that, they're another one that really don't like it as it gets down in the 40s. So get those in as soon as you can. And peas, we can start doing a fall planting of peas now. May or may not make it. You'll notice this is 60 to 70 days, but on the other hand, they're more cold tolerant. So some options there if you want to try something. Um, some of the questions we've been getting recently through garden line or visits or emails. Um, Curling leaves is a real common one that we're hearing about right now. The photo on the right hand side, the taller photo there, uh, is showing a physiological leaf rolling. This is a response of the plant to maybe it dried out a little bit, or maybe it's too wet underneath and the roots can't take up water well enough because they're too wet and not enough oxygen. So you can have both things going on there. It may be a hot, dry day and the leaves are just rolling up to try to decrease the amount of leaf area exposed to both the sun and the wind. But this is often they will relax overnight and open up. Uh, if they roll tight and never unroll, that's the only time that you might start to be concerned. Um, and also some varieties tend to roll up their leaves much more frequently or much more easily than some of the other varieties. Now, if we look at these leaves closely, you'll see they are folding up lengthwise. So they're retaining their length, they're just rolling up. That's in contrast to some of the other rolling that I will show you in a minute. But first I'm going to drop over to the picture on the left. And this has rolled leaves, but we also see quite a bit of browning. And this is the kind of browning that I would look at very closely if somebody brought it into my office, because that browning along the top, that's not really specific spots as much, or is sometimes at the base of the leaf instead of at the ends. If we saw on the outside edges of a leaf, we would think drought, but a lot of times this comes up through the center of the leaf. And that's a pretty good indication of a virus. And in fact, this one on the left, I would kind of guess might be tomato spotted wilt virus. I would have to look at it closer to confirm that, but I often see plants that are kind of brownish on top. With our leaf spot diseases, the leaf blights and septoria, usually the leaves on the bottom, because they stay moister longer, are the first to show the blights, whereas this is showing it up at the top. And that's spread by thrips, which is a little insect, and they can come in at any time. We had so many thrips earlier this spring that I'm expecting to see quite a bit of tomato spotted wilt virus. But anyway, so that's one thing I'm keeping an eye out for. We do have diagnostic strips, kind of like COVID tests, where you can have a quick strip test, takes about 10-15 minutes to find out whether or not you actually have that virus. So remember I talked about it curling up lengthwise. The one on the left there, see that real tight? It's not only curling up lengthwise, but it's kind of shrinking up into itself. So it's losing length. And if you were able to spread these out flat, you'd see that they're very distorted shape of leaves. That's common for phenoxy type herbicide exposure. And a lot of times these leaves will be not brittle, but almost rubbery. And so that's another cause for leaf curling that we see, and one of our most common problems for tomatoes in South Dakota, where we have so much herbicide sprayed on farmlands and on lawns and some gardens. The one on the right I think I might have showed you this a few weeks ago, is actually a virus. And this is a virus I don't believe I've ever seen in South Dakota, but people get online and look at pictures and say, oh, this must be what my plant has. And this one is spread by a beet leaf hopper, and the entomologists I visited with could not tell me whether or not there was that particular leaf hopper in the state. I think it's been found once or twice, but I don't think it's generally more western and southern to us. Um, but this is a virus on the right hand side. You'll notice it's the difference in how the leaves are curling. They're not so much distorted growth wise on the right hand, whereas they are on the left hand. The leaves on these also become thick and crisp as opposed to rubbery. And grapes and tomatoes, I always say, are my two canaries for herbicide exposure. You'll see them, you'll see signs on grapes and on tomatoes before you see damage on any other plant. Sometimes the cucurbits, squashes, and so forth look perfectly fine, and yet you have distorted leaves on the tomatoes or the grapes. And this is the one on the right here would be, a normal shaped grape leaf. And the other four pictures there show leaves that have lost their shape. They don't have that almost maple leaf type of shape, Canadian maple leaf, but instead have the lobes haven't formed. You've got these thick veins. These, instead of rubbery, often feel kind of leathery. And again, phenoxy type herbicide exposure, probably a 2,4-D product of some sort. Dicamba, which we see a lot of drift from too, it tends to curl up the edges more and form cups, whereas the phenoxies do this sort of thing. All right. As long as we're on problems, couple ones that I've seen recently on social media, some confusion about blossom end rot versus early blight on tomatoes. And sometimes early blight isn't necessarily quite that dark, or sometimes blossom end rot is darker than this, although there's a tendency for it to be lighter. Both of them are firm rots. In other words, it's not gushy. If you it might be gushy underneath, but the surface will be kind of dry. Blossom end rot is going to be opposite the stem end of the plant or of the fruit. Sometimes it may be a little bit on this to the side, but mostly it's going to be on that end. Whereas early blight can pretty much be anywhere on the fruit, but often is much closer to the stem end. So that's one way to distinguish between those two problems. The other way I distinguish between them is to look at the foliage. Look at the leaves. If they're clean, don't have any spots on, it's more likely going to be blossom end rot. If they have spots on, and in this case, early blight forms a spot that's kind of a concentric targeting pattern. It may be hard to see, so you may have to look at a number of spots before you get a good one that really shows that pattern. But that's associated with the early blight, the fungus that does both of these issues. Now we have another one that I don't have a photo of right now, but but often in the eastern part of the state, I would see septoria blight on the leaves. And septoria does more small brown spots with yellow margins and can turn your whole leaf yellow, starts again from the bottom of the plant, um, and causes the plant to lose its leaves over time. With both that and the early blight, if you catch it as soon as you start to see some of these spots on the leaves, when it's just starting, you can remove those leaves. And if you can do so, that removes the inoculum for moving further up the plant. So you can often at least hold it back quite a while by removing those infected leaves. Septoria does not affect the fruit at all, so that's a way of telling it from the early blight. Another one that's often showing up at this time of the year is phylloxera on grapes. And this is actually a little insect that in our case overwinters under the bark of our grapevines, under our hybrid vines. In other areas, if you have a European grapevine and it's on its own roots, the phylloxera actually attacks the roots. And that's what almost brought down the entire wine industry in Europe back in the late 1800s. Finally, they figured out that our American rootstocks were resistant to it. And so and our hybrid rootstocks have enough American genes in them that we can plant them on their own roots. We don't actually have to graft them, but the European varieties you have to graft. But anyway, it does still attack the leaves, and it'll show up just about now. You'll start to see these growths on the underside of the leaf, and the insect itself is a little aphid-like creature, and this is a close-up of slicing one of these little bumps in half so that you can see the insects inside. And they hatch, they crawl out, they hatch from underneath the bark and crawl out and crawl to the leaves, usually towards the end of the leaves. And then they make their little homes and lay eggs and make more little creatures. And at the end of the season, these creatures will go hide under the bark for the winter. Well, this looks pretty ugly, but like on this center leaf, that's really not enough to bother the plant too much. It's a lot like a lot of our leaf galls on trees that Dr. Ball will tell you, don't worry about it. Another feature of when these things attack grape leaves is that often we're towards the end of the season for putting out new leaves. And sometimes these are actually beneficial for us, because if we've got a fairly vigorous vine, it attacks kind of the ends of the shoots. And sometimes those are leaves that would block sunlight to the fruit or to the lower leaves where we want it, or to the shoot. And so it almost does us a favor by holding back the growth on some of these outer leaves. So for the most part, homeowners don't have to worry about it too much. If it's really, really bad on a young vine that's kind of struggling, we don't actually have insecticides labeled for home use. There's some insecticides that growers can use, but they're pretty heavy duty insecticides. And so they're not labeled for home use. The best option is probably, if you want to spray something, is Surround, that kaolin clay that leaves kind of white film on whatever it's sprayed on, and it has a number of uses. And you would spray that as soon as you start noticing any of these galls, and keep spraying it. And you have to spray after rain um, on both surfaces of the leaves um, until the shoots have 10 or 12 leaves. And after that, you can stop and don't worry about it. Um, these do not attack the fruit, so no issues there. And they do not go to other plants other than grapes. Some grapes do have some resistance to it. However, Frontenac, one of our widely planted varieties, is pretty susceptible to it. And switching gears a little bit to talk about an ornamental. This is the time of year coming up about now, next month or so, that you can divide iris. It seems kind of weird to mess with things in the middle of the hot, dry season, but that's when iris, once they're done blooming, actually kind of go dormant. So we can dig those up. You want to make sure you're not cutting through the rhizomes when you dig them up. So make sure you're going deep enough and then kind of lift up the whole plant. Then you separate out the rhizomes as you can with your hands and take a good look at them. You want to take any rhizomes that don't have any leaves nearby and get rid of those. They're older and more susceptible to rot. So you want to get rid of, trim away anything that has any rot in it or holes in it that would be iris spores. You don't want to replant any of those, so get rid of those. And then you want to develop sections that have at least 4 or 5 leaves, and the rhizomes are at least, well, about thumb length or about 3 inches long. And then you can trim the leaves back, as is shown here, to 5-6 inches or so. Make sure your sections have plenty of rhizomes or plenty of storage roots there. And then replant them maybe about 1 foot apart. It's often suggested that you kind of make a little mound of soil and place the iris on top of it and drape the roots around that and then fill it in so that the rhizome is just slightly exposed when you replant it. As you're doing that, you may notice that your iris have leaf spots, and this is one I'm always struggling with at my house. And sometimes I get on top of it, but sometimes life gets away from me. So the way to keep on top of this is to remove any foliage with the spots as soon as you see it throughout the season. So taking off these older leaves that are dying back from it. And then in the fall, once you know we've had a hard freeze or and the foliage is all dying back, get rid of all that because the spots will overwinter on the older foliage. So if you can clean that out real good, it'll be a lot slower to get going in the spring. Of course, we always talk about increased air circulation. You know, if you've got weeds around your iris, you might want to clean that out. It might be helpful to divide up your iris and spread them out a little bit to help with that as well. Fungicides aren't really recommended for this. Mostly you should be able to control it with these cultural methods. Something like Cap-10 may be useful if you've got some prize iris that you're wanting to try to maintain. And that's all my slides tonight. I just wanted to remind you that between shows, you're welcome to call or email the garden hotlines. We have them in Pierce, Sioux Falls, Aberdeen, and Rapid. If you want to bring in a sample to one of those, give a call to find out when they're open. Most of these are part-time, so the person is not always there. Although if you just want to drop something off, you can do that, and they will take a look at it once it comes in. And if they're not certain about the answer, they'll contact one of our extension specialists to take a look at it. And we go through and look at some of what they've looked at as well. So it's a good way to get your garden questions answered as well. Notice the email is fairly standard, SDSU and then an underscore. And Gardens West, Gardens North, Gardens Central, Gardens East at sdstate.edu. And I guess that's a period, not an underscore. With
Looks
that,
like we have 4 questions.
okay. And I will let you read them, if you will.
All right. Some participation from the man behind the curtain, I guess. AJ Grinelli wants to know, they have a lot of wild plums that are shriveled up and dry, almost like the pit, just the pit is left. Why would that be happening? It is basically the entire patch.
I can't say for sure, and AJ, if you can get some samples into us, we can take a look. But I did notice when I was down on Pine Ridge a week or 2 ago that there was really bad fly infestation of the fruit. And so I don't know if it's insect damage. That would be my guess. We do have a disease with wild plums also, and I don't think this is it, or at least I didn't see it a few weeks ago, where the plum gets extra large, but it's kind of spongy. It's not like a regular fruit, doesn't turn color, and it doesn't have a pip. So that's another issue, and that's a fungus. But I'm guessing that it was insect damage, and it's really frustrating because it was a really good plum year for fruit production.
All right. Next up, we have Lance Johnson. Corn is tasseling and something is eating the silks on the tip of the ears. No leaf feeding at all. Only bug I could find was a pincher bug in the tip of the ear. I dusted with the new 7, but just a knee-jerk reaction. Do the silks continue to grow, or are those ears going to be barren? Boring question?
Yeah. I would guess that it's probably corn earworms that are getting in there. You do have to have the silks there for the pollen to travel down into the ear. I don't know how advanced the silks were before they disappeared. One of the organic ways to help control corn earworms is to take oil and put it in a cooking oil and put it in a spray container of some sort, like a and I don't know if you could use like the PAM spray that you use to spray your skillet, but and spray the silks, and that smothers the eggs on the silks so that the eggs don't hatch and travel down into the ear. You have to do that before the silks dry up, but you want to give them enough time so that they've got a day or two before you do that. So it's real uh, precise timing to do that, but that can be useful.
All right. Catherine Altman doesn't have a question, but just wanted to thank you for posting her grape leaf pics. Her husband sprayed it with 2,4-D, I guess.
That happens very often. We've actually had some vineyards go out of business because of that. So it's kind of sad.
All right. Oh,
I'll go ahead. Dividing and transplanting peonies. Generally, we like to do that in the fall, late August, early September. Even though they're basically fairly dormant now, we usually do that in the fall.
all right. Michael Card said, if you had a tomato with rolled up leaves, is there a danger in letting the plant bear fruit to eat?
Well, it kind of depends on what the rolled up leaves were caused by. If it's just, like I was talking, rolled up lengthwise, the physiological, they're perfectly safe. If it's tightly curled up, and I showed the example of almost a C-shaped leaf, you're probably not going to get very good fruit anyway, so it may be a moot point. But some studies that have been done with tomatoes, looking over time, it drops off, the levels of the chemical drop off pretty quickly throughout the first month after exposure. If there was fruit on that was nearly ripe when it was exposed, then I'd be a lot more nervous. If it's just started to set fruit and sort of grows out of it, the fruit should probably be okay, unless you're very sensitive to chemicals, in which case I would not eat it then, because there is a small amount that stays in the plant even after a couple months. I'm going to have to refer the cicada killer wasp to when we have Amanda back on the circuit here, and she and Dr. Ling are traveling this week, so well, and Dr. Ball too. So, but they will be back, and we'll have them talk about cicada wasp.
Okay, it seems like we have a question from Colleen Collier. When can you divide and transplant peonies?
That's the one I just answered.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I had a minor technical glitch on my end, so I
Okay.
Okay, then question about John Ball mentioning that Roundup has changed. What is different? That's a formula change, right? Like they changed the entire formula for it or something a while back.
What they did was take the Roundup name and apply it to things that are not glyphosate anymore. And I believe it's several different, it's a whole class of products. So there are different chemicals that are being called Roundup. It's not just any one thing. But Roundup is not being sold. Glyphosate is not being sold as Roundup anymore for consumers. And glyphosate was the one that kills everything in its path.
Okay. Got it. And now we have one final question. Oh no, we have. Oh wait, no, it's the same question twice. But anyways, Kim McKeon asks, my broccolini never developed heads. Is this largely due to the above average temps we've had in May and June?
It may be, although broccolini tends to be a little less sensitive to that because you're you're looking for more, you're not tied into having that big solid head. Um, but another thing that can cause problems with both broccoli and cauliflower is if your transplants are too large when you first transplant them. Uh, if they're a little too old and they're getting a little root bound when you transplant them, they may not develop proper heads. So it could be an issue of that. Um, Particularly if you put them out and then you have a cold spell. Uh, it's like once they're bigger than a pencil width um, on the stem, you can run into problems if they're exposed to cold. Uh, so they're a little fussy with the timing on the transplants. And then I see we have a question about the difference between Asiatic and Oriental lilies. And I can say that I once knew the answer to that, but it's been long ago enough that I looked at that I'd have to go back and remind myself of the answer to that. So if anybody knows the answer and wants to type it in there, they are welcome to do that. Grasshoppers are eating silks on the corn. Yeah, that could very well be. And you might not catch them in the process. How do you know when to harvest garlic? This is a good question because right now people are starting to look, is it ready yet? A couple of things that can give you a clue about whether or not it's ready is several of the older leaves should be dying back. If they're all still green, the plant's probably still growing. And once, if you want to sample and see if they're ready, what you do is pull the garlic, cut it, across all the little cloves, and it should have good separation between the cloves. It should have a good firm outside skin to each little clove. If that's not developed enough, it's not going to store well. So you could probably use it up right away, but if you want it to store for a while, that skin between the cloves needs to be developed well. And the leaves starting to die back can give you a clue about that. If you have a lot of blossoms but not much fruiting, is there anything you can do? One of the things you want to look at closely is whether it's all male blossoms or if you've got fruiting blossoms. And we have both male and female blossoms on all the cucurbits, so melons, cucumbers, pumpkins, squash. And it'll be a little miniature fruit at the base of the flower if it's a female. If you're just starting to see blossoms, or maybe we can go as long as 2 weeks, especially during hot weather, where the male blossoms will show up first and we don't have females yet. So that's one thing that we often see, why we're not getting fruit set. The other thing that usually is less of a problem, but could be a problem if you've used a lot of insecticide around, is that we're not getting enough bees to pollinate. And each melon blossom is only open for about 4 hours, usually in the morning, where it can be pollinated. And if it's not pollinated in that time, it's going to go ahead and fall off. So in the meantime, do a lot of fried squash blossoms, I guess.
We got another one. Should common tansy be contained to avoid aggressive spreading, or can it be planted directly in the flower bed?
I would contain it, and you probably need to worry about the seed to some degree too. It can be pretty enthusiastic.
Okay. We have any further questions?
Going once, going twice. And here's a picture of our iris that we hope to have in blossom next year. So again, if you didn't get your question answered or one occurs to you during the week, feel free to go to the Ask Extension. You can find that at extension.sdstate.edu. Click on Yard and Garden and then the problems and solutions. Otherwise, we hope to see you next week at this time, and have a good week. Have a good gardening. Thank you.